Today, I am honored to be joined by U.S. Airforce Major Hasard Lee. In 2016, Hazard was selected as the top instructor pilot of the year for the Air Force's largest F 16 combat wing. In 2017, he led his pilots into combat during one of the most intense periods in the war in Afghanistan. He has flown 82 combat missions, has 4 air medals, and is the only fighter pilot to have the distinction of flying 2 different jets into combat on the same day. Hazard is also a content creator. In just the last year, his content has reached over 290 million people. And his new book, The Art of Clear Thinking, is available for pre-order now and comes out on May 23rd. Today, we sit down to discuss the absolute importance of decision making and how making clear and distinct decisions is the absolute key to finding joy. In addition, Hazard and I have a great discussion about how he has found joy throughout his professional career and through his personal endeavors. If you enjoyed today's show and would like to continue seeing even more incredible conversations, please follow along and leave a rating. It is the best way to help us grow the show, and I can't thank you enough for being a supporter. Thank you for tuning in to the R20s podcast. Without further ado, Hazard Lee. 5 years old, you're in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and you're watching the Thunderbirds fly over, and you say to yourself that you want to be a fighter pilot. You can't exactly start training to be a pilot at a young age. You have to wait a little bit till you're in high school till you can start taking your first flying lessons. And you paid for your first flying lessons by the money that you made at McDonald's. And fast forward a little bit, you're now getting ready to apply to the Air Force Academy, and you get that letter in the mail that you're all excited for, and it says you have to wait a year now. You have to go to school, keep those grades up, and then we'll let you in a year. When I see that kind of passion and that determination, I'm always amazed. And from a lot of my findings in the guests I've interviewed, that comes from within, but it also comes from a really great support system. So can you tell me a little bit about your parents and your family life, especially at that young age?
Yeah,
How did they help you direct into that life?
you've clearly done your research. So it's mostly correct. I saw an air show. It wasn't in Los Alamos. I moved there later on, but yeah, it's really instilled by your family, I think. And my parents were very very driven. My dad was born in Taiwan and immigrated here when he was 12, and he became a scientist. And that's why we ended up in Los Alamos because he was working on, you know, nuclear weapons out there. So he was driven. You know, the odds were stacked against him. Being an immigrant, 12 years old, coming over here, he got into Berkeley and then MIT, all on scholarship. He worked in laundromats to be able to make ends meet, and so he had that fire in him, and I guess he passed it on to me. So uh, from him, I got a ability to work hard, my work ethic, and then from my mom, she has a ability to manage risk really well. So the way they met in Los Alamos or in New Mexico because she moved out to live with the Pueblos out there after college, and this was back in the 70s. You know, there's no FaceTime, nothing like that. So it's pretty much going out into the wilderness to live with the Pueblos to try and help teach them and provide them support. So definitely have to give credit to my parents for being able to raise me and any success I might have had.
It's always amazing to hear the support that families give to help their children achieve their dreams. It's something that was so vital to me when I got started, just going to college and now doing this. If I didn't have the support of my parents, I wouldn't be anywhere. Fast forward, now you're in college, you're in the Air Force Academy, and you're boxing when you're at school. You take up this sport, and you talk about it a lot now that you've gone into the instructor role after your career in the Air Force. That visualization, especially with sports and working with sports psychologists, it's so important to the actual pilots. I want to talk about the actual physical side too. I want to see, what did you learn from boxing in terms of body control and breath control? How were you able to take that with you as you transition into your career as a fighter pilot?
Well, I think if we're just talking the physical side, you have to be in really good shape flying fighters. So we're pulling upwards of 9 Gs, 9 times the force of gravity. That's 2,000 pounds of force just crushing you into your seat. So even though we're just in a seat, it's physically demanding. After a flight, we'll lose 5 to 10 pounds of water weight, and you just come back drenched in sweat. You are wearing a G suit, which are like snow pants on. You're wearing a jacket for the F-35 because they have lanyards in case you have to eject. So it is difficult, especially if you're in a desert environment. If you're in Arizona, it's 120 degrees outside. You're coming back just drenched in sweat. So you have to be in good shape. You have to be able to squeeze the blood in your legs into your brain. So, from a physical standpoint, you have to be in good shape. And boxing taught me the discipline of how to eat well, how to sleep well, how to take care of your body, how to work out properly. And, so by the time I got to pilot training, I wasn't having to worry about figuring out that. I had that dialed in, just had to tweak it a little bit. From the mental standpoint, it might have been even more valuable. Being able to stay in the present moment is difficult. And I didn't learn that until I went to the Air Force Academy and I was sitting in the high performance lab waiting to take place in an altitude study. Air Force Academy is 7,000 feet above sea level, so it's pretty difficult to be able to train at high altitude like that. But I was sitting there waiting for the study to start. Colorado Springs is also where the Olympic Training Center is. And so there's a sports psychologist from the Olympic Training Center that was there. And we got chatting, and he was talking about how every Olympic athlete had a mental performance plan to go along with their physical performance plan. And it really involved visualization, self talk, staying in the present moment. And from then on, I started applying those principles to my boxing and then also to my daily life. So anytime I had to give a speech, anytime I had to, do anything with that was under high pressure, I applied those principles and I carried them on to pilot training, which helped me. That was really the only edge I had. I, wasn't a more talented pilot than anybody else. I worked really hard, but I had that. That was kind of my secret weapon in pilot training, and I expected this stuff to be more developed because it's such a performance boost, but it wasn't, at least until recently. So fast forward about 6 or 7 years, the Air Force has now really gotten or started getting really involved in 2017 into the human performance space for fighter pilots. And so now all that mental performance, physical performance training is now integrated into Air Force pilot training. So any pilot that joins the Air Force, and it's being expanded to Marines and Navy as well, gets a baseline for all that performance training, and then it carries with them throughout their career.
Fascinating stuff. That's so fascinating to me. The mental aspect of sports. When I was growing up, I was a baseball player, and we were always taught about the importance of visualization, making a good catch, making a nice hit, and stuff like that. They gave us a book when we were in high school. It was called "The Power of Your Subconscious Mind" by Dr. Joseph Murphy. Are you familiar with the book?
I'm not.
Oh, it's an amazing book. I highly recommend that you check it out. It's all about that idea of visualization and how you have to train your subconscious mind by repeatedly going through the scenario in your head and telling yourself that you are going to be successful and the power that that has on you mentally in terms of being able to succeed. So we would use it in our sports life to visualize us getting the game winning hit, taking a nice swing at the ball, and we would tell ourselves that we are these good players, we are these good hitters, and in return, it would come into fruition when it was game time. Same kind of thing apply. There was a lot of different applications in the book, and a lot of different segments of like people telling themselves that they weren't sick, and then they would feel better because they've told themselves that they are going to get better. It's just a real mindset change, and I think it's really great that the Air Force and the military as a whole is really implementing that and making it a key part of the training program. There's all the training that you can do, but anytime that it's ready to, you have to go live. You're now going out into battle in this case. It's a shock. It was a shock in the sports world, and I'm sure you can ramp that up by a million in terms of actually going out into battle. You had to enter into some crazy situations that I don't think a lot of the audience of this show, being young people, can really understand. One of those missions that you were a part of was the Wild Weasel missions. Can you describe what those missions were? And can you walk us through the preparation, the execution, and the debrief phase for something that is so crazy? Just a little context. The tagline was, "You gotta be shitting me," for these missions. And you were a part of them. So can you walk us through those?
Yeah, so the Wild Weasel mission, also known as the SEED mission, Suppression of Enemy Air Defense, was really born in Vietnam when they first started developing these surface-to-air missiles. So think Top Gun, everybody's seen it, the new one, Maverick, when they're flying through the canyon, all those missile sites are, above them. Those are surface-to-air missiles, and in Top Gun, they would have been shot down by those surface-to-air missile sites. So instead of flying super low like that, what the military does is we will have a squadron called the Wild Weasels will go in and destroy those surface to air missile sites. And so it's difficult because you have to have them turn on their radar. So you have to fly close enough that they can get a shot on you. They'll turn on their radar, and then you can use what are called high speed anti radiation missiles to shoot them. So it's kind of like an old Wild West quick draw. Who's going to get shot at first? You both have to step into the arena. So, in my opinion, it's the single most important mission. You can see it playing out in Ukraine right now. Russia did not have good uh, seed fighters and a deep knowledge of the seed mission, and they were not able to establish air superiority over the battlefield. So you have to be able to have those fighters to take out the enemy fighters that are flying above the battlefield, but you also have to take out those SAM sites to establish air superiority. So very difficult mission set. There's a ton of preparation and studying that goes into it. In my opinion, there is more in that single mission set than every other mission set that we do, at least in the F-16 or F-35 combined. It's just very difficult because these missiles are tied into what's called an integrated air defense, and so everything is connected. And as Wild Weasel pilots, we call them Block 50 pilots. You really have to be able to pick apart that system. You don't have unlimited weapons. You have only a few aircraft. You have to be able to find the key parts, key nodes, destroy those so that you can establish that localized air superiority for the bombers to go in, strike their targets, and get out. So our motto was first in, last out, and it's a high risk mission, but it was something that we love to do. You talk to the mission planning of it, very difficult. We're working with the intelligence to be able to figure out those key nodes, and then we're really working backwards. So if we need to establish a protected area for the bombers for whatever 15 minutes for their bomb strikes, then we have to work backwards of how, which SAM sites do we need to destroy, limited weapons. So we ideally want to avoid them, not even worry about those SAM sites. If we have to, we'll disrupt them with electronic attack or something else. And then as a last resort, we'll destroy them. But it can be difficult. I mean, these are people on the ground that sit around thinking about how to shoot us down. So they're very, very clever, very smart. And it's about being able to get inside their decision making and try to disrupt it. They're doing the same thing to you, and ultimately be able to protect those bombers to go in and strike their targets.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And decision making is the main thesis behind your upcoming book, which I'm very excited for, by the way. And decision making is something that you could be a civilian, you could be a fighter pilot. Everybody struggles to make decisions. Everybody loves to think that it's so easy, but the amount of preparation that goes into a key decision, like the ones that you just described, that can be years of preparation. And when I talk about years, that's everything from going through pilot school to being able to be comfortable in the moment making that own decision. You had talked about something called the good idea cutoff line when you're going through preparation, where you're sitting in a room and it's really key that everybody on the team is on the same page when you're getting ready to go out into the mission. But you can't change the story or the game plan too close to when you're getting ready to go out, even if it's a really good idea, because everybody needs to be set in stone on the same page. Can you explain that a little bit more to the audience? Because everybody loves to have great ideas, and sometimes that eureka moment happens at the 11th hour. But when you're in a team mission like this, and maybe we're not working in the Air Force now, maybe we're in a corporation, maybe you're on a sports team, how important is it to keep everyone on the same page versus maybe boosting up the idea by another couple percentage points?
Right. So whether you're playing a mission or you're, conducting a project in the civilian world, it really comes down to multiple parties all being able to work together. So when we go and fly missions, it'll sometimes be dozens, sometimes hundreds of people from disparate backgrounds all coming together to align towards one common goal, overall mission success. So you have this, it's not this nimble speedboat, it's this battleship of people that are coming together. And so typically as a mission commander, you'll establish a GICL line, good idea cutoff line. It's generally about 2/3 of the way through the mission. It really depends on what you're doing and what assets are available. But that's where you will not change the plan. You're essentially freezing the plan and going with what you have because there's so many moving parts. If you start changing things at the last minute, you're going to run into a lot of issues with people not understanding their roles, not understanding the contracts, and it's overall a detriment to the mission. So we've seen this many times flying fighters. People will come in. It's easy actually to have a good idea and kind of just lob it into the planning process. What's difficult is finding a way to integrate it all together, because ultimately what we're trying to do is trying to have a synergistic effect where all these different assets are coming together and the sum is greater than the parts. So it's that communication integration that's really the difficult piece. And what we found is that good idea cutoff line is critical for getting everybody aligned towards the actual game plan and getting ready to actually fly the mission to execute it, as opposed to continuing to tweak it. And then that communication starts getting lost throughout the organization. That being said, there's never a time limit for the bad idea cutoff line. So you can always simplify a plan. If you're seeing something at the last minute that's not good, as long as you can communicate to everybody else, simplifying is the key. Because whether you're going into business, whether you're going into combat, there's a lot of variables out there. There's a lot of complexity, a lot of things that you haven't planned for. So you want to be able to be as simple, as flexible as possible. And so the good idea cutoff line, about 2/3 of the way through. Bad idea cutoff line, there's really no limit to it.
I'm a big supporter of the Occam's razor theory, where simple is always the best solution, and it speaks so true that it applies even at this incredible level. You transition from the preparation phase to the execution phase, and you've described that as being like an NFL quarterback, where you're looking at a playbook, and there's so many different tactics that could be implemented at any time during the mission, and you have to not only be able to execute it yourself, but that key point that a lot of people will mess up on in their civilian lives, especially, is that communication. If you can't communicate effectively with the people around you, whether that be a family member, whether that be someone in your corporation, someone that you're on a team with, everything falls apart. And I don't think any of us can get through this life alone. And that's the real key, is being able to communicate effectively what the goal is and how you're going to get there. When you're in the moment, how do you go about, first of all, doing what you need to do and executing? But second of all, in a leadership role, how do you go about making sure that everyone else is staying calm around you and they're all directed towards the goal?
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. So when you're flying, a lot of people think of it as a 1v1 cage match when we're flying fighters. So we're just going up against whatever the latest other fighter is from the adversary. But it's really like a football match where you have 50, you have 100 aircraft all going in against the enemies. And they are not just limited to the air. So you're fighting and your assets are in the air, in space, in the cyber world, on the ground. So you're trying to find the puzzle to maximize your force and to find the weakness of the enemy. So it's these big, big, uh, fleets of aircraft going into the enemy country. And so, as a mission commander, as a team lead, or even as a flight lead in charge of like 4 other aircraft, your job is to be able to communicate well. So, as a fighter pilot, it really starts. I'll go through kind of quickly the progression. So you start off as a wingman, where you're just following around your flight lead. From there, after a couple of years, you'll go to become a flight lead in charge of 4 other aircraft. Then after that, you'll become an instructor pilot, teaching those new wingmen how to become flight leads, and flight leads to become instructors. And then you'll also be in charge of, a mission commander or a team lead, where you're in charge of dozens or sometimes hundreds of other aircraft. So the critical step is moving from more of a individual contributor role, where your job is to be as tactically proficient as possible, to be able to execute as perfectly as possible, to now we're willing to accept a little bit of a degraded ability to do that, so that you can now communicate with your flight lead, because your overall success is going to be your 4 ship, the 12 aircraft out there, the 100 other aircraft out there. So it becomes more about being able to communicate well and being able to pass your intent to others out there. Now, as a leader, you need to be calm under pressure. You can't just be, you know, uh, going up and down, emotionally unstable. You have to be stable. You have to be aligning everybody towards that common goal. That's really, as fighter pilots, what we have to focus on, just making good decisions. We're at 15,000 feet. We're in a comfortable cockpit compared to the troops on the ground. So we need somebody that's level headed, that can continue to make decisions. They're not all going to be perfect, but to keep making them. A lot of people don't understand no decision is a decision, and it's usually the worst one you can make. So you want to make decisions and keep moving, especially when you're talking about the day-to-day operations. So for bigger decisions, you can pause a little bit, mull on it, but for day-to-day ops, it's a huge advantage to be able to quickly make decisions and to move on.
I think that's where a lot of people in civilian life will get confused, is that inaction right there. That to me is one of the biggest thieves of joy, which this show is all about. How do we find joy? And not being able to make that key decision and missing out on the opportunity that might result from that decision, that could be game changing. And again, when you're in that leadership role, you have to realize the role that you're in. You can't do everything now. That's not your purpose. Your purpose is to make those key decisions and to lead accordingly. It's not to be doing everything and anything to make sure that everything's working correctly. You have to trust the people that you're working with. And of course, mistakes are going to happen. It's natural. We're all human. But reflection is so key. And that's why I'm so fascinated by the debrief process, where you'll go through a 15 to 20-minute segment of the training mission and you'll spend 2 to 6 hours just reflecting on what just happened, because reflection is so key. And you talk about something that I think is really great, where you say, okay, we're going to think of 3 things that went really well and 3 things that we can improve on. And you draw the line there. Where I personally get stuck in reflection is I'll think of 3 things that went well, and then I'll think of 30,000 things that could have gone better. And I'll just stammer and reflect on those 30,000 things over and over again. And that really will affect me mentally. That's my snowball effect. And I'll take that with me into the next run. Why do you think the 3 and 3 model works so efficiently for you? Is it the cutoff? Is it just the balance of the 3 and 3? You have an equal good and bad. Is it something that maybe I'm missing?
I don't think it's critical that it's just 3 and 3. So I think the number one thing is just debriefing, just reviewing what you did. And this is something that, we've had a lot of different organizations come and watch what we do. And this is probably the biggest, you know, piece of the training that people take away. So we've had NASA astronauts, we'd have had CIA agents, coaches come and watch what we do. And the number one thing that they take away from is the debrief and really focusing on, how the mission went. So like you said, we'll go out and fly. Typically our missions are about an hour and a half. The tactical portion can sometimes be as short as 15 minutes. If we're doing BFM dogfighting, you burn a lot of fuel quickly. Other missions generally about 45 minutes of vulnerability time that we're focused on for the mission, and we'll come back and we'll debrief for 2 to 6 hours, sometimes even more. So when we're doing a large force exercise like red flag, we would take off. We would take off generally around 10 p.m. at night, go and fly the mission, come back, debrief, and when we would get out of the secure debriefing facilities, it would be light out. So we'd spend all night, figuring out every little thing that went wrong. Now, I think it's important, like we talked to be able to simplify. You can't fix 50 things at once. So, as a mission commander, when you're in charge of hundreds of people, your job is to find a few things that people can work on. And then down the echelon, everybody should do the same thing. What I personally do is I carry around a little black book, or you can do it in your phone, but we go into a lot of secure debriefing facilities that don't allow phones. So I have a little black book that I take with me, and I write down those 3 things that did well, 3 things that I need to work on at different levels. So if I'm a mission commander, what did I screw up from the mission planning process? What did I screw up from my communication? And then from the individual level, what did I screw up from an execution standpoint and how I can do better? I think from instructing a lot of people out there, the 3 and 3 works well. It can be anything, it could be 5 and 5, it can be 2 and 2. But focus on just a few things that you think you can do better for next time. If you can just fix a few things, then you will, be able to grow very, very quickly over a short amount of time. I think it's important not to just hammer yourself with 30 things that you did bad. That's pretty demoralizing. It's important to be having fun, to be able to maintain confidence while you're doing this. So that's why I like, especially with new pilots, especially if they're having a tough time, throw them a few things that they did well. If they're passionate about something, if they're enjoying it, you're going to do a lot better than if you hate it, and you hate yourself and you're always berating yourself. It's it's pretty challenging if to maintain something. You played sports. Most of the young kids that were superstars, with hard parents on them, they kind of burned out before college because they hated the sport by the time they got into high school. So same thing with flying. You want somebody that is continually showing up, that's motivated for 10 years, 20 years down the road, as opposed to maybe fitting in 30 things that they could do better, but hating flying.
1% better every day is something I always try to live by. And that compound effect, you get 1% better every day. And instead of being at 90%, now you're at 91, it's just compounding and compounding. That idea that you just mentioned right there, of like the star athlete with the hard parents that are constantly trying to push them to be great, but it's having a rebound effect. When you're in a debrief session, rank goes out the window. Anybody has the free authority to talk to anybody, no matter how senior they are. That's not always the case when we're in a family setting. The child can't always tell the parent what's going wrong. Maybe the parent doesn't want to hear it. You can't tell your coach how to coach better. You can't tell your boss how to act better. Sometimes that rank system can't be broken in our debrief sessions in the civilian world. What's your advice to somebody who might be listening that might be like my age? I'm 23, who's in that corporate role, who's trying to make it work with maybe a partner, maybe they're with roommates or something like that. And rank does matter. They feel this cage over them that they can't speak their mind freely, even though it might be to the benefit of the relationship. Do you have any advice for how to navigate that type of situation?
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, it's not enjoyable to have somebody that is constantly, pulling rank on you and not letting you, not seeing you as a peer, not owning their mistakes. There's only so much you can do. You can control yourself. You can't control other people around you. So you're going to have bad bosses. You're going to have people that you don't enjoy working with. I would say the best advice that I've gotten for that is just to own what you're doing, to not worry about them, to be the change. So you might be 23, not in charge of a lot of people, but soon you'll be in charge of, a small team, and it'll only grow from there. So you can be the change. You won't have an opportunity really to sit with your boss and be able to change them. But, I think most bosses are kind of observing what's going on around them. And if they see you're constantly taking ownership, you are calling out, your mistakes first, I think you can almost manage up by doing that. It's not going to work to be direct with them, but if you use it as an example to them, there's a good possibility that not only will they change, but they'll respect your opinion a lot more. But more importantly, you'll be the change. So the people that you're in charge of will be a lot more open to, calling their own mistakes out. And overall, you're going to have a much higher performing team. I see, poor organizations that aren't able to do this, and half the work goes into just signaling that they're doing work as opposed to actually doing their own work. So that's the one thing, the fighter pilot debrief, as you talk to, nameless, rankless, it's a sterile environment. It's not a stable environment. So it takes strong leaders to be able to keep this going, where they call themselves out first. So as a young person, you might not be able to have that influence in an organization, but you can at least have it within your sphere of influence. So, you know, as a leader, first thing you want to do is point out a few things that you can do better. And then I think that has a ripple effect, and other people feel a lot more comfortable. Now, when they call themselves out as a boss, even if it's something stupid, you can't just tear into them, especially in a public environment. That'll quickly crumble it. Like I said, it's an unstable environment. So you really, really have to work hard at keeping it a professional, sterile environment. And then after that, that 15 minutes, that 2 hour period, then you can go back to normal.
That really is the art part to the science, where you have to be able to hold that professionalism and really stay true to your own character. And I think young people don't realize the influence that they have, especially on people that are our own age. Maybe they're not younger than us, but our coworkers around us, our peers around us. Just setting the example, like you just said, you set the tone for what's to come in the future. That's all we can control. And that's a beautiful thing, to have complete control over something, to be able to shape something to be what you want it to be and see it come to fruition down the line. When it comes to being able to control our own lives, I think where young people today might get mixed up is two things. I'll start with the first part. It's that effort. Everybody wants to be at point B, like you said, put their name on the work and show that something is getting done, but nobody ever wants to start at point A, and they never want to take that journey that it takes to get to point B. You had quite the journey, as we talked about in the beginning. What's your opinion on effort as a whole? Can effort be taught, or is that something that just has to come from within and it has to come from this undying passion and motivation to become something that you currently aren't?
I think you can foster effort. I think, as a parent, you can definitely foster, uh, change up the mindset of the child, as opposed to, you know, praising them for actually doing a good job, praise them for trying hard. So I think I think it can definitely be fostered. I think part of it is innate. Effort is a critical skill. It's a talent. So if you're having trouble with effort, then I would say start implementing systems. So I think systems beats motivation and inspiration. And for me, that's coming up with a perfect day. So from a time allocation perspective. So for me, that's waking up early, that's working out, that's coming back, eating breakfast, something healthy, then doing about 4 hours of deep work, taking a break for lunch, coming back, doing about 4 hours of secondary work, meetings and email and stuff like that, spending time with family. So I try to, you know, if I have inspiration and motivation, you know, I'll try to harness that. When in doubt, just stick to your systems, stick to those, that time allocation. Try to have that perfect day, and more often than not, over time, you'll be able to achieve your goals. So I think systems are really important. It's something that I think a lot about.
I love that. If you can't identify the perfect day and you don't know what you're working to, it's going to be really difficult to be able to map out exactly what you need to do. I think there becomes a crossroads where effort and talent will meet up and you've reached that maximum potential. And then there's one final difference maker, which is that attention to detail. And that's that separating factor that takes someone from being great to being at the top of their class, like you were. That attention to detail is difficult to teach people. And in the fighter pilot world, there was something that you've talked about multiple times, which is that attention to detail. And it is life or death in some cases, where if you show up and you're just 3% dehydrated, your risk of blacking out is now 50% increased. That's insane. That's a little detail that might go overlooked by somebody who's not fully in tune with everything that needs to be on their checklist to prepare properly. That could have serious consequences. In civilian life, obviously it's not as extreme, but we talk about not having a correct diet, not having a correct workout routine, not training your brain properly, not getting enough sunlight. There's a lot of different factors that could affect our mood, our mentality, and ultimately where we end up at the end of the day. What message do you have for young people when it comes to attention to detail? Because I think it gets overlooked a lot of the time where somebody can show up and they can hand in a piece of work and they say, it's done, I did it, but no, I didn't go over it multiple times and I didn't look at every single nook and cranny to make sure everything was perfect. I think people get attention to detail and perfectionism confused. That people say we can't strive for perfectionism, which I agree with, but that doesn't mean that we should never try to pick up on the little details and try to be that 1% better, like we talked about. I'm just interested to hear your opinion on attention to detail.
Yeah, I think you raised some good points there. I would say there's one skill that's more important than attention to detail, and that's the ability to prioritize. So we call it a cross check when we're flying. We're trying to find all the information that we can see to maintain situational awareness of the battlefield. So we're moving our attention, throughout the different gauges in the jet to be able to build that mental model of the problem. So think of it, whatever problems that you face in your life or in the office. So not all problems require the same effort and attention to detail. It's about trying to maximize the overall whole. It's about systems thinking. So if you're thinking about your overall performance throughout the day, it's sleep, it's being able to have dedicated focus time, it's about relationships, it's about being able to uh, allocate your time properly to what you're trying to do. So some things require immense attention to detail. So if we're flying, if we're on that final attack run and we're trying to drop a 2,000 pound bomb in close proximity to troops on the ground, what we call a danger close drop, you need very, very high attention to detail to the switch actuations that you're making. That might mean your altitude starts to drift a little bit, and that's okay because we want those switch actuations perfect. We want that bomb to hit perfectly. So I would say being able to prioritize and figure out the few key things to focus on is more important than attention to detail. Once you find those things, then you can allocate your time, because anything we're doing out here requires, for the most part, being able to focus on multiple variables at once. So I think that's one thing, is being able to understand those few key variables and really hone in on those. And the rest, some you can let slide, some don't matter at all. Um, but I think prioritization is the one key skill that everything flows from.
I want to focus on that last part real quick, where prioritizing, in my eyes, is step one, and adapting might be that second step, where there's 100 voices coming at you telling you what you need to do, but you need to prioritize, and not just prioritize, but also filter out which points in the data set are relevant to the situation at hand. I think that is really difficult for young people, is being able to really focus in on those key data points that are going to help you get to that place that you want to be. So if we're a star athlete, what do I need to focus on in my training? There's 100 different things that I could train today, but what do I really need to focus on? If I'm in a corporation, there's 50 different tasks that need to be accomplished, but which ones are more important and which ones can be delegated out maybe to someone else on the team? How did you go about in your fighter pilot days that prioritizing, but also adapting, where a lot of information's coming at you in real time very fast, and you have to make that split second decision and say, okay, I need to implement this now on the hierarchy of needs, and this needs to go down, this needs to go up.
Yeah. So I wrote a chapter about this in my book on one of the most important decisions in history, and that was when Eisenhower made the decision to execute on D-Day. They actually pushed the day back by a day due to the weather. And so one of the critical skills that Eisenhower had was the ability to discern between what was important and what was urgent. And so I think that's the one key ability. If you want to think of it in quadrants, you have things that are important and urgent. Those are the fire drills that you have to do right now. If you're able to plan ahead, typically you can move away from that and you don't have a lot of important and urgent fire drills to have to do every day. So most people know that if it's important and urgent, you have to do it. But here's the thing that a lot of people struggle with: what's important versus what's urgent. And what's important is obviously more important to your long term goals, but people really get sucked into what's urgent. That's the emails, the meetings, the things that are constantly bothering you, that are notifying you that you have to get to, but don't really have long term value. And then you have things that are not important and not urgent, and that's stuff that you need to cut if you can. So I think it's being able to discern between what's important and what's urgent, and just thinking about it and writing it down. There's a Harvard study done a while back, and you had a 62% increase in ability to prioritize if you could just write down what was important and what was urgent. So that would be my advice: is just write it down. This is important, this is urgent. If you want to put it into a quadrant format, that can make it a little bit easier. But most of the things that are trying to suck our attention away aren't necessarily the things that are most important for being able to achieve our goals. So I think you need to have a vision, be able to work back. If your job is to make a certain promotion, work back, talk to people, and understand what are the few key variables to making that happen. Same thing for us. As a wingman, you want to become a flight lead. You talk to flight leads and instructors. What are the few key things that I need to work on to be able to be a flight lead in a year or two? And then you can work on those, even though your job as a wingman is to do things that are completely different. Now, you can't drop everything off, and just focus on being a flight lead or trying to be an executive, but you can, with any extra added bandwidth, focus on those important parts versus the urgent.
That's amazing advice. I think everybody, if you need to rewind that part, that is 10 out of 10 advice. And that's something that you won't hear every day. That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. I think that just comes, again, I can't praise you enough. That comes from just years of your instructing and your experience. And I'm so grateful that you're sharing your wisdom with all of us. It's such a pleasure to be able to do this. Instructing is something that a lot of young people can't relate to, but I think it's cool to focus on because that relationship aspect where you're an instructor and now you have to facilitate the relationships that are being formed by the young pilots that are coming in and building that camaraderie, that teamwork. And you're in that role where you have that leadership ability to help guide them in that way. I know everybody who's a young person, the main introduction that they have to fighter pilots is Top Gun. I feel like that's pretty standard stuff. And of course, in Top Gun, there's the unrealistic actual flying segment. But I want to focus in on the actual instructor part, especially of Top Gun 2. I'm assuming you saw the movie.
Yes.
I want I want to know how accurate was the actual instruction part in terms of the team building. Was there anything that you saw in the movie that was accurate to what would actually happen in the Air Force, and maybe anything that you would personally do?
So you have to think of Top Gun as kind of just amplifying everything to make it entertaining.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm assuming you guys didn't do like football on the beach, shirtless with music playing in the
just
background.
volleyball in jeans with the shirt off. Um, so the thing about Top Gun is most fighter pilots watch it. We appreciate it. You know, it's a very well done movie, but it is pretty much completely wrong in every aspect of flying. Now the actual communication and things like that is pretty good, but the actual like kind of heart of the story is pretty far off. Um, you know, so when I look at some of the training stuff they did, they destroyed a jet. They, you know, Maverick stole a jet to, you know, go and do that canyon run. Most of the things I see from a critical eye. That being said, his passion for trying to push the students to be as good as they possibly can be, to be able to cut through the red tape. There's a lot of red tape in the Air Force. Same with organizations. They're very, very risk averse. Organizations, just in general, risk averse. That's why you see most of the startups out there that actually take these ideas to fruition. Um, you know, come from, you know, small founders that are fanatical about an idea. So overall, organizations kill good ideas. And I think Top Gun was an instance of a person that was out there trying to make something great and trying to push back against the system. Now, I don't think his technique would really work in the Air Force or in most organizations. I think you have to be a little bit more discerning, a little bit more focused on how you do that. It's a movie, of course, but I think that there's, you know, I think most organizations would be better off with a little bit of maverick in everybody and willing to take some risk. Organizations will default to not taking any risk, and that's why you see a lot of big organizations get passed by these smaller startups that come out of Silicon Valley or other places. So being able to accept risk, take risk, move fast, make decisions, those are things that I think translate from the fighter world to the corporate world. And same thing with, you know, with what we're doing flying. The Air Force is not all fighter pilots. There are a lot of people that really want to move slowly. And with technology, and especially in the Air Force, we leverage technology a lot. So when I fly a fighter, I can travel 100 times faster than I can by foot. I can carry 100 times more. I can see out to the horizons. This technology is all leveraging each decision I'm making. So it's very important to be able to get that right. That doesn't just apply to fighter pilots. All of us are now able to do that. This podcast, imagine doing this podcast in 1980. Like you need a whole team doing things like, you know, you would have to we'd have to be in the same room, same space. You probably have a whole room full of gear. Technology is leveraging what you're able to do. Same thing with computers, Excel, the phone in your pocket. As a good example, I saw the average American is now using 12,000 watts of electricity, and we only burn 90 watts. So that difference of 11,000 watts goes into the technology that's amplifying our decisions and our decision making. So I think it's something that's really important to look at, and it's only accelerating.
Leveraging your resources is so key. And I think where young people are getting really confused is they're trying to replace certain tasks with AI, especially now is the big buzz term. People are trying to say, oh, I don't need to do this. I could just allocate it now to AI. And hold the horses a little bit. I think we're a long way away from completely replacing, but leveraging, absolutely. You need to be looking at what resources are available to you and how you could be implementing those into your life. But what the AI can't do is have relationships. You can't have that human relationship. You can't form that bond and that trust. That's something that is completely unique to us. And forming that bond, it goes very deep beyond the surface level. I thought a really good, interesting story that you told was contrary to popular belief, in case anyone was wondering, your real name's not Hazard. It's your call sign. We can't divulge why it's Hazard out of respect. But you had first name Fridays when you were in the Air Force, where you guys would come together and you would actually learn what your first names are because you were so used to calling each other by your call signs. And people would say, how could you possibly have a good relationship if you don't know their first name? Relationships go a lot deeper than the surface. From your time, what do you think is the biggest key component to forming not just solid relationships, but solid trust? And we're talking beyond a work relationship now. I'm talking about real core relationships with friends, with spouses, with children, anybody who's looking to really set in stone their relationship and make sure that trust is never broken. What's the key that you found?
Difficult times, making it suck. Military does a good job of that in basic training or the Air Force Academy, or if you're deployed. If you make it suck, you form those relationships. So that's why it's a little bit difficult remotely, to really get to know and trust coworkers. It's really being in the mix of things, whether you're with a spouse, having a kid, or going through something difficult like a deployment. That's really that where it tests you. So you're not really judged by the high times, you're judged by the low times. So I have not found a workaround around this. You got to do things that suck together. So if I were, planning a corporate retreat, I wouldn't just, have something where we're just going out to brunch every day. I would do something where people are having to push themselves and having to rely on other people. When we went to Afghanistan as a group, it was challenging. We were the only squadron in the country. We were flying 24 hours a day, about 30 pilots. So it'd be just a two ship taking off every day, and there's no weekends, no days off. You're being mortared, every few days, and those are the guys that I feel closest to, because we went through the suck together. Same thing with the Air Force Academy, very difficult experience. Those are the people that I keep in contact with because we all have that shared experience. So find a way to do something that sucks together.
You had a really great story that you had written about of a time that was really difficult, but something so small went such a long way to rebuilding the morale and getting everybody to come back together and reunite. And that little thing was Chick-fil-A sauce. Can you tell a little bit about that story? It was not the best time, but something so small was able to get the team back up in spirits.
Yeah, we were deployed to Afghanistan at the time. So, like I said, we were really busy out there. The food isn't great, and so generally about 3 months through deployment, it's really kind of the lull time. Like you've it's not something new anymore. People are kind of getting a little bit worn out. You can't really see the light at the end of the tunnel, and so I've never seen anything better. So for people out there, if you have friends that are deployed, Chick-fil-A sauce was the biggest hit. And somebody sent like 50 of them to us. And, the food we're eating isn't good, but if you put enough, sauce on it, it's manageable. So yeah, I thought that was a great, a great gift that somebody sent, and it was pretty easy to do. So I mean, it's just the little things. People are thinking about you. It's easy when you're kind of on the other side of the world to kind of be detached and to think that people aren't really worrying about you. News cycles go on, life goes on without you. So just hearing some small things from loved ones goes a long way. And with technology, it's a lot easier to do. But I don't think that just applies to people that are deployed. If you know somebody that's you know traveling the world and is an English teacher in Korea or something like that, just those small things can make a big difference.
100% agree. I can't thank you enough for your service. I'm going to thank you again at the end of the show just because it needs to be said more than once. We've talked a lot about your career. I want to wrap things up by talking about something that's equally as important, and that's your relationship as being a husband, and now you are a father. Congratulations. What is that experience like? I can't relate to it in either sense. I can't understand the joy that comes with being a husband. I can't understand the joy that comes with being a father. Yet I know that for me personally, that's something that I truly aspire to be. As much as I want to have successes in my career, I want to have equally as many successes as a husband and as a father. Can you just describe the impact it's had on your world? How do you see the world differently now as a father, and just the support that you have from your wife to be able to do everything in your professional career and with your relationship? What is that like?
Well, I think the most important decision you're going to make in your life is who you're going to get married to, that or whoever you spend the most time with. And for me, it's definitely spouse. I think that's for most people. um, so finding the right one is critical, and fortunately I found a great one. And like you said, we have a son and another kid on the way. So being a dad, it's definitely eye opening. It's a fantastic experience. I would recommend for most people. For me, I waited till I was in my 30s, and I think that was one of the best decisions that I made, to be able to focus professionally for the first, throughout my 20s and the beginning of my 30s. Because once you become a dad, you're dedicating a lot of time to keeping somebody else alive, and it's the best thing in the world. But it's something that is really challenging to be able to progress in your career as well as maintain and be a father. So it's a fantastic experience. It's probably the best thing that I've done in my life, but it's something that really has to be thought of ahead of time, and you really have to focus. How am I going to balance all these things together? But yeah, I think that is one of the few things that has really changed me for the better. I would say being a father, going into combat, and boxing, like learning how to fight and learning how to lose and learning how to win. Those are some things that are key things that you really can't get anywhere else. So for me, it made a big difference, and I'm a much better person for it.
Absolutely amazing. And the one last thing I want to highlight about you is that every single time you showed up, you took the bull by the horns and you stood tall to the challenge. And even where we are now, with your book coming out in May, this is probably a place that I can imagine you didn't see that 5-year-old version of yourself who's watching the Thunderbirds. I don't know if he would expect you to be here right now where we are. But Memorial Day a couple of years ago, somebody asks if you can go up and give a speech. That speech turns into you speaking to students at schools, turns into you having a very successful podcast, turns into you making incredible connections, and now you have a book coming out that's going to touch thousands upon thousands of lives. Showing up is something that a lot of people struggle with, but it's something that's so key. Did you ever expect to be at this point in your life? It's kind of the question that I just asked about your 5-year-old version of yourself. Did you ever think that you would be here? And when you took that initial leap and you got up there on Memorial Day and you gave that speech, were you nervous at the time? And did you have any idea where this could possibly go? Did you just have to embrace the absolute beauty that comes with taking on a new challenge in life?
So the answer is not at all. So I had that goal as a young kid to become a fighter pilot, but it was more of just imaginary thing out there that that I wanted to imagine myself doing. So it was just kind of focusing on the steps, focusing on the process, not getting caught up and overwhelmed by how far out the goal was. So it's kind of two different things. So the fighter pilot thing, I had that goal and I was really focused on doing it. I wasn't sure if it was going to work out or not, but I figured I'd give it a shot, and do everything I could to make it happen. All the stuff afterwards has been kind of a circuitous path. Like you said, I came back from flying in combat, and they wanted me to give a speech, and that led to a teacher in the crowd who wanted me to come to their school, started speaking to kids, and then started a podcast because they were all interested in the military and flying and stuff like that. And I figured I could get that out to a lot more people with the podcast. I had no idea I was going to do that. I didn't have any social media up until then. I remember having to learn from my wife how to use Instagram. This was, back in 2018. And then from that, it led to the podcast, like you said, from that to the book. So yeah, I had no idea. I didn't have like a firm goal out there. I said I wanted to do a podcast. I did a podcast. I thought a book would be really interesting to do. I focused on the book, and that's a multi-year process. Like overall, it took probably 6 years to be able to fully write the book, and now it's coming out at the end of May, and it's being translated into different languages. It's a priority book by Barnes and Noble and Meta, which is pretty neat to see. But yeah, I had no idea that this stuff would happen, and it wasn't a set goal. It was just focusing on having those perfect days, focusing on just doing that deep work in the morning. For me, that was writing 4 hours every day. I wrote for a year and a half straight, didn't take a single day off. And yeah, it took 6 years. So I think it's just having a vision of something and then going after it and knowing that the dots will connect looking back. It's tough to be able to see that going forward. The one piece of advice I would give for people that are younger and in their 30s as well and 40s, maybe I'm not there yet, would be to accept risk. Most people are so scared of making tough decisions. Now you have to be able to weigh the pros and cons. I really like looking at decisions in terms of expected value. So what's the good that's going to happen? What's the probability of that happening? What's the bad? What's the probability of that happening? Merging those two together. But for decisions that are kind of 50-50, that I can't really, there's too much uncertainty, I will just automatically go with the riskier option. Just go with the riskier option. There's a lot of uncertainty in most decisions. If it's a 50-50 decision, 60-40 decision, just go with the riskier option, because that will prevent most people from doing it, because most people are really averse to risk and don't want to take that chance. So if you are somebody that wants to take the chance, you have a moat that most people aren't willing to cross.
Once again, a massive thank you to Hasard for joining me for today. I don't know how many times I said it during the actual show, but I can't thank him enough for his service, and I can't thank him enough for sharing his wisdom with all of us today. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please follow along and leave a rating. It is the best way to help grow the show. Once again, I can't thank you enough for being a supporter. It really means the world to me that I'm able to produce this for all of you. Until next time, I'll see you.